Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. We were going to have an in-person meeting tonight, but Ken is coming to us remotely, and we'll see him in a little bit here. Uh, that's Ken, a picture of him. We'll see him live in a moment here.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about that big data for AI and how it helps the community. A couple of housekeeping things as usual first. Thank you, Ramona. Thanks, Ramona. She had the whole big room set up down the hall there, but there's not enough of us. She had it warmed up and everything for us. Next time. So if you're not familiar with us, there's a few of us here that are part of the section officers. We have several more that are not here tonight, but we are going to be looking for others to join us whenever you feel so compelled. We have elections coming up soon, June. Yeah. So if you have an interest in helping us out, we would appreciate that. Doesn't take much. A little bit of lifting here and there. Cindy does most of that anyway these days. But those are your officers. Next meeting, we actually have a good plan set up for the next several months. So we have one coming up February 19th. It'll be here again, of course. That's with somebody who you all may know at some point too from up here, David Workman, familiar name to many nodding heads here. He's going to talk to us about coax and fiber and IP. Oh my, that was his phrase. And really, he works for Embryonics, so it's discussion of how all those SFPs and the OEM work that he does works in today's networking world. So that should be interesting as well. And next, the big QR code. If you want to see our YouTube channel, go back and see other discussions. That would be the way to do it. Otherwise, the URL is kind of difficult. So there's a tiny URL I made, a shortcut, or there's a QR code if you want to take a snap of that. And then we have everything there. So you want to go back and see past ones. You can see Matt's class again if you want, or others. That's all there on the YouTube channel. So a little bit about Ken. I haven't met you yet, Ken, but I'm going to talk about you as if I know you. A software developer, startup founder, open source enthusiast. This all comes from his work from the current place he's at. But you have a lot of background, certainly in AV, software development, things like that. Worked at Apple for years. I think everybody relishes that sort of time. Anybody who's worked for Apple, I've heard, they always talk about it for many, many years afterwards. They're very happy about that work. And you certainly did some amazing things there with the original Macintosh. That must have been an amazing time. And then I noticed reading your bio that you were also on the board of Bear Yuba Land Trust, which is also something I'm very happy to be supportive of, and many here probably are also as well. So that's a really good local connection here. Yeah. So we thank you for that. But now for AI for community, you've switched gears, and we're looking forward to hearing about all that. I think that's all I have to share at first. We can get this thing going.
All right. Thanks for having me. A, a couple of quick comments. One is, you mentioned everybody who's worked at Apple talks about Apple a lot. It's true. I think it's mostly like PTSD, like it's survivor stories, because it can be intense and stressful. I know it was for me, as you'll hear about. I think somebody yelled out when you were like, "We'll Photoshop it," and somebody said, "Yeah, we'll use AI," and it's true. It's amazing if you get a chance to use Nano Banana Pro right now is probably one of the better tools for just like removing people or adding people or changing the background. It's pretty crazy how good it is. So I did a little switch up here on what I was going to talk about, because I will talk about the nonprofit that I started and how I get there, or how I wound up there. But this talk is really about the value of taking breaks, because how I got there was yet another sort of reinvention of who I was, which I've found myself doing at regular intervals, and often because I took a break. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So I'm gonna talk about that. So why take a break? And for me, taking breaks is because it's so easy to be in a rut, right? To just keep doing the same thing. And by taking a break, it gives you a chance to explore new ideas, and you have this space to make changes. So here's some examples. I started off, graduated from MIT in '83, and I immediately joined Apple, and I was working on the Lisa computer, and then I moved over to the Mac group, and Cindy actually shared a picture that Guy Kawasaki had shared. of the Mac team, and I kind of circled me sort of in the back middle there, back when I had a lot of reddish brown hair. Um, so incredible opportunity, like getting to work with amazingly talented people, and everybody had this shared vision. It was great. The challenge was I moved over from the Lisa group. I was sort of the Jackie Robinson that Steve Jobs said, here's what you're going to do. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. And a guy in the group that I was friends with said, you have to think about what your long-term career at Apple is going to be like if you say no to Steve. So they brought me over to prove that you could go from this Lisa group over to the Mac group. And I was the youngest guy there, and I felt like I really had to prove myself. So I was doing these like 100-hour weeks, week after week. Um, and what I was doing was I was figuring out a way to get Mac software to run on the Lisa, because the Lisa had a bigger screen, had more memory. So how do you trick all these Macintosh programs into running on a different computer? It was still 68,000 based processor, but different architecture, underneath the hood at the very bottom, different OS. So really interesting project. But then I went for my annual physical, and the doctor's like, "Well, you've got high blood pressure," and I'd had low blood pressure my whole life, and he said, "I think you need to work less and exercise more," which was like, "Yeah, duh." But he said, "No, really, for your health, you need to." And then I found out that indirectly, Apple had ceased producing Lisas, but they weren't telling anybody that. And so what I was doing was writing the software that Apple was using to convince consumers to buy this remaining inventory, and then they were going to discontinue it. So basically, I was just helping unload Lisa computers on unsuspecting consumers, which did not feel good. So a friend of mine at Apple said, "Hey, why don't we go to Aspen and spend the winter skiing?" And I said, "That sounds like a great idea." I hadn't really skied much before, but I figured this is a great way to learn how to ski. I got endless grief because my ski pass had my name Kenneth Drugler, not Kenneth Krugler. Um, but I spent the winter skiing in Aspen. And then the interesting thing is, Apple Japan got me to come over on a consulting gig. And the issue is they had to like do it on the down low, because Steve Jobs had said, Apple is going to assign none of the resources in the Core OS group to Japan because Japan is not a big enough market. It's not an interesting enough market. And there were only 9 of us at the time in the core, in the OS group for the Macintosh. Like there were really only 9 people working on the guts of the Macintosh, small team. So he's like, no, you can't do it. But I was on break, so I could go, right? And I flew over there and had an amazing experience realizing that I could apply some of these same things I'd learned about tricking sort of Mac software to run on the Lisa to tricking software written by US companies to run in a Japanese environment. Like there were some of the same games that you would play. So I realized, okay, I could do this project to create a Japanese Macintosh. And that became the thing I did when I went back to Apple in, I guess it was April or May of that year. And that project was called Kanji Talk. And Apple Japan made this nice little monolithic thing for me when we finally released it. Uh, and I called this the revenge of my German teacher, because in high school, my worst subject was German. And I would say to the teacher, the only reason I'm taking German is because I got to have 3 years of it for UC schools. Everybody speaks English. Why is anybody studying German? And he hated me for that. And instead, like what my career became was working on international versions of the Macintosh. So we did Japanese and Chinese and Korean, and then we did Thai and Tibetan, and we did some of the Indic writing systems, Devanagari, Gurmukhi, and Gujarati. We also worked on Hebrew and Arabic. Like all of these, I mean, it was fascinating because all of them had different issues, like, Hebrew and Arabic or right to left. This Devanagari, Thai, Tibetan, et cetera, were contextual, where the shape of the letter changes as you type additional letters. It's like ligatures to the nth degree. And obviously, Japanese, Chinese, Korean have the issues with like very large character sets, multi-byte characters. So that became my life. And it was great. And I would not have done that if I hadn't taken that break and spent the winter skiing in Aspen. In 87, I actually started my own consulting company while I was still living in Japan. And that company, we did consulting for Apple, and we also started making products like input methods for typing Japanese and Chinese, and a text outliner and a word processor for the Macintosh market there. But the Asian markets uh, are hard, as I'm sure many of you know, like distribution in Japan. What a nightmare. Weird, mysterious warehouse fire in Thailand that destroyed our inventory. All these crazy things going on. And it was a grind. So in 1995, or basically 94, I didn't shut down the company, but I let almost everybody go. I said, look, I'm not going to keep bringing in work and fighting in these markets. I'm going to do something else. And so in 95, my wife and I moved to Hong Kong, and I just decided I was going to do fun programming. I was just going to take a break and try new things. And I went to this meetup at the Apple Hong Kong users group office where this guy, Rob Haitani, who is the product manager for the Palm Pilot. I mean, how many here know the Palm Pilot or, yep, okay. And it was, it kind of did change my life at that point. So he's giving this demo and he's talking about all the things Palm Pilot can do. And there's a guy from Apple there, from the Newton group. Who remembers the Newton as like a, right, early PDA? And the guy from Apple's like, the Newton can do all these same things. And Rob said, show me. And he knew the guy couldn't because he didn't have the Newton with him because it was too big, right? He made this point, like a PDA that you don't have with you is worthless, which is very similar to the point that a friend of mine, this guy Rick Smolin, who's an amazing world famous photographer, made about buying cameras. He said the best camera is the one that you have with you when you need to make the shot. His point being, if you have a camera that's like so big or so expensive that you don't have it with you all the time, it's worthless. And the second point that he made, this guy Rob Haitani made, is thinking about the PDA as not as a computer, but as a watch. He says when you use your watch, you don't say, you know, booting Timex operating system, launching the clock application. It's just there, right? It's always on. And and in listening to him, I realized they had this vision that was really compelling and was going to be successful. So I started writing code for it, and I started thinking about, how to make Japanese work on this Palm Pilot. I got in touch with the company, with Palm, and I wound up consulting for them. My company did. And we did Japanese, Chinese, Korean, like the same kinds of things. It was almost 7 years worth of consulting. I mean, it was a really long engagement, which is very unusual, right? Most consulting gigs, you don't have, the issue is, I find with consulting projects, is either it's a small company, they have this idea, you consult for them, and they go out of business. Or um, it's a bigger company, you consult for them, they're successful, and then they hire their own people, right? They figure out a way to no longer need you. So it's really rare to have long-term clients. In this case, we had this long-term client, and I think the reason why is because nobody else wanted to do it, which is, okay, maybe a good spot to have. The issue is it's a super constrained environment, right? The original Palm Pilot was 128K, right? It had 128K of memory. It had a 160 by 160 pixel display, right? It had a processor that was running at, I don't know, 2 MIPS or something, right? So everything was written in low-level C code or 68K assembler. Like you had to worry about every single byte of memory and every pixel on the screen and every CPU cycle. So it was, in some ways, very painful programming. But what's interesting is their environment they created was very similar to the Mac. So for me, it was a super easy transition to working on this. But I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't taken that break and spent time in Hong Kong just trying things. And the Palm Pilot wasn't the first thing I tried. I wrote some screensavers. I did some work on a program to learn Chinese. I did a bunch of things that were just fun, right? Which is different than the normal day-to-day consulting gig where you're always like, is this going to feed mouths? Right? Is this going to bring in money? And instead, I just did whatever I thought was interesting. However, after 7 years, it was clear to me that Palm was not going to win. Like things were fraying, things were not going well. Apple was coming out with the iPhone. They had a lot of competition. The company structure was not good. So I'm like, this is not going to be a long-term thing. I'm going to have to reinvent myself again. And I have a 4-year-old daughter. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to spend more time with her. So I took another break, a year-long break. and I started working with open source. And in specifically, I was helping out with some open source projects, primarily Mitch Kapoor, who founded Lotus 123. He had this open software application foundation in San Francisco, and they were trying to create a new personal information manager called Chandler. And there's actually a book about this. I think it's called Dreaming in Code or something. It's really interesting. If you get a chance to read it, it's a good book. So I helped out with this open source project just because it was fun. And I realized there's like two important things. There is so much open source out there. I had no idea. And my number one programming tool was Google. Like I found myself just doing so many searches during the course of the day. And so what I decided was to do a startup. So I did a startup. It was called Krugel. It was like search as a programming tool. Yes, we did get the letter from Google's attorneys saying, we've noticed that Krugel sounds a lot like Google. And I'm like, well, it's like my last name where the R is a registered mark or something. Anyway, they eventually they left us alone. So it was all about like, how do you find useful things as a programmer? The focus was on finding open source code and internal source code. We raised $10 million and we left a large crater in 2008. So 2008 was not a good time to be trying to raise money for our Series B. That was when the whole financial meltdown was happening. And our six biggest customers at that time were all banks. It was Bank of America and Wells Fargo and JP Morgan. And we had venture debt, and the bank that we had the venture debt from called their loan. It was a nightmare. So sad outcome, but it did introduce me to the world of big data because we were doing things like we've got over 3 billion lines of open source code. How do we basically extract that, parse it, and index it so it's searchable? That's a big data problem. And so we were very early users of this nascent big data technology called Hadoop, and using an execution framework known as MapReduce in order to scale to where we needed to be for this amount of data, which was amazing. I went from the Palm Pilot, embedded C, 120K of memory, to writing in Java on clusters of like 100 servers, right? Where the constraint wasn't how many bytes you had, et cetera. It was like, how can you scale up? How can you parallelize everything? So basically, that led me down the path once my startup tanked of doing big data consulting. So that's finally how we get to the big data space, right? So I was like, what am I going to do now? Well, I'll write code for companies that need help with big data, and my company will. I had a couple people working for me. So we started a boutique big data consulting company. However, after about whatever 5 or 6 years, the base technology that we're using, Hadoop, and something on top of it called cascading, was getting old. And it was also, it was losing I was losing fun. It wasn't interesting to me. So I decided to take another break, just arbitrarily, 2015. So I took a break. Um, and I started experimenting with something called semantic vectors. And I don't know if anybody here has dealt with semantic vectors. Basically, there's this project Google did called Word to Vec, where roughly you can think of it for every word, you got a vector of 2048. So it's a 2048 dimensional space that this vector is in. And the meaning of the numbers in that vector are that if two words have similar semantic meaning, their vectors, the angle between their vectors is going to be close, it's going to be small. And if two words have like opposite meaning, they're going to be essentially, you can think of it as like 180 degrees apart. But what's interesting is you can do math with it. You can do things like take the vector, everybody knows this one, take the vector for king, subtract from it the vector for male, add the vector for female, and the resulting vector you get is very close to the one for queen, right? So it's encoding semantic information in these vectors. And that's the basis, like for all these LLMs, when you hear about, these large language models for AI, when they talk about them, there's an embedding layer where they're converting text into numbers, because ultimately these LLMs are sort of modeling a neural network where things have to be numbers. You have these different connections, and the sum of the weights of the connections, if they exceed a threshold, causes that next thing to fire. So how do you convert words to numbers? And they do it in the embedding layer using semantic vectors. But at this point, like the large neural net thing wasn't a thing, but semantic vectors were really cool. Also, I found out about this new open source project called Flink that came out of Germany. And Flink, instead of being batch oriented like Hadoop, was about streaming data. And it was scalable and reliable. And it was like a modern architecture. It was really interesting to me. So I made a bet. I said, okay, I'm going to come back and we are going to go all in on Flink. And for some of our clients, we're going to start using semantic vector stuff, which led to a huge amount of consulting work. So for example, one of our clients was AdBeat. They needed to do something, they were in the advertising analytics space. So they wanted to know which two advertisers, if I have some arbitrary advertiser, what are the 5 advertisers that are most similar to it? Where similarity depends on what kind of ads they're running. So how do you decide 2 ads are similar? You want it to be kind of a fuzzy match. You don't want it to be like exact word match. So what we do is we would take their ads and we'd use the semantic vectors for the words and sum them together and come up with like a semantic vector for the ad. And then we would add semantic vectors across all the ads for the advertiser, weighted by the ad spend for each ad. And we come up with vectors for advertisers. And then I built a do-it-yourself vector database, sort of a roll your own vector database before they were a thing, that let us do that kind of vector search. And it worked really well. And then we also used Flink for things like a huge project with Citibank and a lot of other companies. So it paid off because if I had been nose to the grindstone, still doing the existing consulting projects, I wouldn't have had the time to really explore Flink. And I wouldn't have had the time to really explore these semantic vectors, which led to the next phase of the company. I also started doing technical training. I've loved teaching. I helped start a Girls Who Code club locally with Cindy's help. Um, I did Hour of Code in local schools. I taught programming at Whitney College Prep High School. I taught programming as an enrichment program for 6th graders. I love teaching, and I'd been doing some teaching on some open source projects, other ones, but I started a lot of Flink technical training as just kind of a side gig, which was great. But I knew I didn't want to keep consulting forever. I mean, I was getting close to 60, so I started winding down my consulting work in 2022. I was still doing teaching, but not so much consulting. And I started using ChatGPT. And one of the things I tried, and this was actually, I think, early 2023, I was fooling around with like how good a job AI can do summarizing things and also adopting a persona, like do this as this kind of person, or also create this summary for this target person. And so I said, explain the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus to a Jesuit priest. It's a very complex philosophical document from the early 1900s. I had a friend who reminded me of a Jesuit priest. So this was the prompt I gave it. And it came up with this thing. There's one of the theses in this philosophical paper is that there are things that you cannot explain with human language. There are concepts beyond the capabilities for us to discuss using language. And so we shouldn't bother talking about those things. And here, what ChatGPT came up with, talking as a Jesuit, is, you know, reminding us that God's nature is ultimately beyond our full comprehension, and there are realms of our existence that remain sacred, silent, and beautifully mysterious. And I remember I was sitting in Java John's coffee shop, and I read that, and I got like a chill. And my second thought was, okay, where did AI crib that from? Like, where did that come from? So I took that phrase, sacred, silent, and beautifully mysterious, and I ran it through, Google and Bing and even Yahoo, and I got 0 hits, which meant AI had come up with that. ChatGPT had come up with that. And that was something better than anything I could have done. And that's when I decided, all right, I'm all in on AI. It was so compelling. Um, but beginning of 2024, in February, my wife died. Soon after that, my daughter said, hey, why don't we hike the PCT together? So I hiked the PCT with her. This was a serious break. In November, after that break, I was sitting there saying, what what am I going to do next? And I realized I was really stressed about like world level events, things that were going on that I could do nothing to affect. And that was really bad for me. And so what I decided was I'm going to focus on community. In my community, what can I do? And because of my experience on the Bear Yuba Land Trust and in helping with nonprofits over the years, I said, this is where I want to focus on nonprofits. I feel like they're at the front line, fighting the good fight for a lot of things that are very important in our community. How am I going to support them? I mean, I've given money in the past, I've donated time on projects, but I wanted more leverage. Like, how can I provide more leverage? And out of that came the idea of I am going to teach nonprofits how to use AI effectively and responsibly. That became the goal. That was from November. Um, and one of the reasons why is it's a highly leveraged model. Like if I can, by teaching somebody who works at a nonprofit, make them 5% more effective, like they do 5% more in the course of a year, that's worth $4,000. Like that's the actual 5%, that's like a real cost there on average across the US. And there are 800,000 active nonprofits in the US. So even if I had like a goal of I'm only going to teach one person from every nonprofit, that would still be 800,000 people. So I decided that's one of those big, hairy, audacious goals, and it's highly leveraged. So I started working on it. You got to start somewhere. I looked around to see is anybody else teaching AI for nonprofits or has a course that feels like it's going to be effective, and I couldn't find anything. So I said, all right, I'll create my own curriculum. I've done it before for these other technical classes. I'll do it for AI for nonprofits. I decided it was going to be a 4 hour long course. That was a constraint I put on it. Like, what can I do in 4 hours? Um, Tested it out on local friends, and it was really effective. And it was important to them. It was useful. And I'm like, I want to scale it out. And that's when I realized it was actually in March of last year I needed to start my own nonprofit. I had to dog food it. Like the what I realized when I was teaching technical classes was that even though I didn't have formal training as a teacher, and I don't think I'm a great teacher, because I had used the technology extensively on complex projects, I had this real world expertise that made my teaching meaningful to students. And I loved it when it was like stump the chump, where they'd be like, here's a really complex problem. And it was so much fun to try and solve it because when I could solve it, they were very happy and it was rewarding. And if I couldn't solve it, then that's something I needed to learn about. And I love learning. It was like a great source of here's what to study next. So I said, I'm going to start a nonprofit and everything I do, I'm going to try and do with AI appropriately, right? Which is a key point. I think I said the goal is to teach nonprofits how to use AI effectively and responsibly. There's a lot of mistakes you can make with AI. And I think the backlash that you see from people about AI relates to those mistakes. So I carved out, it's almost 30% of the time in the class um, talking about the issues with AI around hallucination and bias and environmental impacts, data centers, all the things that can bite you in the butt if you're using AI on a daily basis. So, so now I'm in the next phase of my rebirth, whatever you want to call it. So this year we're working on expanding scale and scope. There's this big stretch goal of training 1,000 people this year. I'd be happy if we get to 500. I hired an admin person. We redid the website. Uh, there's a lot going on. Add more advanced courses. We're partnering with community foundations, including Nevada County Community Foundation, Placer Ventura, and Orange County, et cetera. We found that's a very effective model for getting in touch with nonprofits. And there's also support organizations like TechSoup. I don't know if anybody's worked with TechSoup. They support nonprofits. Candid is a nonprofit sort of assistance organization, and N10. All right. So that's the long story, the Shaggy Dog story of how I got from working at Apple to AI for community. But I think the key point I wanted to make is this, right? If you're riding a bike, uphill, like you're grinding uphill, it's really hard to shift gears. And I think it's similar with your career, right? If you're just pushing hard on the thing that you know how to do, the thing that you're doing at your current job, it's hard to make a change. And that's why I think taking breaks is so important. But if you're going to take a break, it does require planning. You've got to think about, okay, the money. What about my job? I don't want to leave anybody, in a bad situation when I take a break from my company. How's my family going to deal with this? It's not easy, but it's been incredibly rewarding. And one of the keys is, sorry. Oh, so one of the things is during the break, just try all kinds of things. The goal isn't to achieve a goal. The goal is to try things, right? And figure out what's just enough exposure to something for you to get a sense of, yeah, is this interesting? Is it meaningful? Does it speak to me? Or should I go on to something else? And that's okay.
Yeah. Are you muted? Yeah.
Hmm?
It's not easy.
Not, and
Can't choke my wife.
yeah, the
Somebody's
last
not,
thing,
by the way.
the last thing I'm going to say is it's not about clearing off your to-do list. I made that mistake in 2015 where I went on break and I said, okay, great. Now I can get all those things done that have been sitting on my to-do list forever. But the reason they've been sitting on my to-do list forever is because I don't want to do them. Like that's why they're there. So every day I'd get up and I'd be looking at this to-do list filled with unpleasant tasks, and it was not a good start to that break. And embracing the awkward, like it's really okay to suck at a new thing. When I started programming for the Palm Pilot, I had no idea what I was doing, but it was okay because also I wasn't getting paid for it. Right? It wasn't like I was generating garbage and somebody was paying me to do that. All right. So at this point, if we had extra time, I was going to go into a demo of some of the recent things about Claude that I've really enjoyed. But I also know that we're at right about the time, I
Yeah,
think.
we got time. Oh, yeah. No, we're good. We got time if you got time.
I can do a few things if you're up for it.
Yes.
Okay. So Claude, when we teach the class, we cover ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. Like those are the sort of the big three. There's Copilot, there's Grok, etc. But these are the three that have the most functionality. To me, it's the most interesting. And I use Claude for a lot of stuff because currently Claude, I like things about it more than the others. So one thing with Claude is personalization. So what do I mean by personalization? What I mean is this. So I have this AI for Community team plan, and I've got settings. And in the settings, there's this ability to add a personal preferences here. So one thing, I don't know if everybody knows this, but when you interact with any of these AIs and you put your prompt in, you type your question, in addition to your question, there are these other sort of implicit pieces of prompting text that are getting added. So there's something called the system prompt, which is the God prompt. It's the thing that is implicitly part of every one of your prompts that these companies use to try and guide the AI to behave as they want it to behave. Right? So there's sort of meta level instructions. As part of this, it's got things like guardrails. Don't be racist. Don't be misogynistic, etc., which work to varying degrees. But there's a system prompt. And then, for example, here in Claude, I can add an additional prompt here that implicitly is added to every one of my interactions with Claude. So in this case, I say, prioritize accuracy, verify facts, cite sources where available, and challenge questionable claims or assumptions, either mine or yours, end responses with a confidence score and brief justification. So what this does is this prompt then reduces the hallucinations and it adds additional information that makes it easier for me to verify the results that I'm getting back. And finally, at the very end, Claude will put a confidence score, which helps me decide how much should I double check things. Like if it's 95% confident, then I'm like almost always, okay, it looks fine to me. And if it's 70% confident, I'm like, yeah, this has probably got some mistakes in it or some incorrect assumptions, etc. It's something I don't trust. So this is an amazing personalization thing for Claude. Also, like with ChatGPT, they have a slightly different thing here that's kind of interesting. Up here, they have a base, style, and tone, right? You can pick from a number of different styles. Really, all that's doing is adding another prompt, which is a prompt they're using to describe the tone that they want the AI to use when responding, right? And they also have additional characteristics. And again, all these things are doing is they're just sort of adding pre-canned implicit prompts to every interaction. Make sense? Right? So it's the personalization. So there's Claude personalization. There's also artifacts. So with Claude artifacts, if I go over here and I go to artifacts, one of the things I've done is so one of the things I did is I created a tech entrepreneur donor letter evaluation, and in here somewhere I've got a donor persona down here. So what I did with what artifacts are is you have a conversation with Claude, and the end result is to create a document that you can use in other chats, or you can download it and use it in other ways, but it's sort of, there's a distinct thing that it's creating. And in this case, I went through a bunch of questions and answers with Claude trying to figure out how would I describe my ideal Silicon Valley donor for my nonprofit? And the end result was this donor persona that they just called Alex Chen, net worth, location, what they're currently doing, how they think about AI, why they might want to give to me. What's interesting here, and I want to call this out. Let me see if I can up here, one of the things it came up with is this was really great. I don't know if can you see this? Can everybody see this, or does it need to get bigger?
Bigger.
Let me see if I can. Is this better?
Bigger.
Okay, I don't know how much bigger I can get here, but the point is, let's see, where is it? Is it down here? Okay, here. They said they came up with this potential objections and concerns. Why can't nonprofits just figure this out for themselves with free tools? Is this a short-term trend or sustainable long-term? How do I know the training actually sticks and changes behavior? Right? It came up with like 5 really good objections that resonate. Like I can imagine myself being this guy and saying, yes, these are my concerns. Then what I did in here is I addressed those concerns in my response. Like, will AI eliminate nonprofit jobs and hurt the people I'm trying to help? And I'm like, most nonprofits I know are understaffed, so being able to do more with the people they already have is likely the likely direction versus cutting jobs, right? So I'm addressing a concern. I addressed all those concerns, and that helped it craft on the right-hand side here this great donor persona, right? So this is an artifact. So why are artifacts useful? When working with AI, providing good context is often the most important thing. And by context, I mean things like supporting documents about your organization and your project and what your goals are, all the things that you would give to somebody if you're like, hey, I need you to do this job, right? And they're going to say, well, where's the spec? Where's the, the goal? What's the goal, et cetera. It's all regular standard management, setting a clear goal. So creating a document like this as an artifact using AI is really useful then for subsequent things that you can do with AI. As an example, with projects, you give it static context and instructions. So over here with Claude, if I go over to projects, one of my projects is donor communications. So in donor communications, let me see, how can yes. I've given it instructions. You are a communications advisor for AI for Community, right? A nonprofit that da. When leveraging, answer these 7 questions. When evaluating a communication, answer these 7 questions. We have some core messaging, our unique value, target donor characteristics, etc. I created this document using Claude to help explain how we want to communicate with people. So it came up with this really great set of instructions. And also, I uploaded that donor persona, Alex Chen, that I'd previously created. Like, this is a target donor for when I'm evaluating these outbound donor communications. I also had worked with Claude to create a quick fact sheet about AI for Community. So now I've got this project where I can put anything in here, like I can say, here's an email. Support AI training for nonprofits. Dear name, blah, blah, blah. This is just an intentionally lame email to test. And here's the assessment it came up with. Needs significant revision, specific weaknesses, etc. It goes through all these things. And at the bottom, because of those instructions, those personalizations that I'd given Claude, it gave it a confidence score and why it felt like it was that confident about it, which makes it easier for me to quickly evaluate the response I got back from Claude. And I'm going to say one final thing. In projects, I also have projects where I'm evaluating grant opportunities. And I use that same quick fact sheet about my company, about my nonprofit, as context when I'm asking Claude, do you think this grant opportunity is a good one for me to apply to? Does it make sense for me to spend the time to actually fill out that grant application? Right, so these artifacts typically are things that you can repurpose in multiple places. All right, any questions about that? That's basically the end. I got a couple other things I could do, but.
That's awesome. It is.
Okay.
Shout it out. They'll get you. Yeah.
How does the AI evaluate its own percentage of effectiveness?
So it's not, yeah, it's an interesting question. How you were saying, how does it come up with like 95%?
Yes.
Okay. So, what AI is likely doing, and AIs are unfortunately still pretty much black boxes, but what it's likely doing is applying heuristics that have been described elsewhere for how you would decide whether some report was accurate or not. And it's using those same heuristics against its own report. So it's sort of, has learned from other people who have said, here's how you would evaluate a report and come up with like how confident you are about it. Somewhere there's lots of research papers that have been written on that, and it's leveraging that. I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of like when you argue with somebody about evolution, and they're like, how could you get like something this complex, this organism? And it's like, well, the thing you don't understand is time. Like you don't understand that it's billions of years. And with AI, the thing that I think people don't understand is the scope of data that has been used to train it. Like you just have to assume it's seen every single possible management research paper related to evaluating reports. Like that's part of its input data.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mhm.
Besides the lessons that you're trying to teach this year, what are your other goals for AI for Community?
I mean, well, I need to establish a solid donor base. I want to apply successfully for at least one grant. I need to, these are things around supporting the idea of training at least 500 people. right? I have a part-time admin person. I need to probably get a marketing person. Or actually what I really need is a salesperson. Does anybody know like a really good retired salesperson who wants to atone for the sins of their past life and could help me do outreach to community foundations? That would be great. Because I don't like sales. I hate sales. And that means I'm not going to do a good job of it. And yet that's one of the most important things right now for the nonprofit is getting in touch with a lot of community foundations. I'm also trying to learn how to backcountry ski, but that's not related to AI for community.
Any skiers in the group?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And what you're describing, it's John from Netgear, is exactly what we're implemented in-house with the AI tool called Jasper. Jasper.ai. I didn't know all this stuff exists in Claude. It's a company rollout, and we're paying who knows how much. But the same thing, we put in the personas you're trying to get at for the IT customer or AV customer, whoever, and all the supporting documentation. It's the exact stuff I've been working with for the last 6 months. So
Yep.
very interesting network.
Yeah.
But it's all
And
free.
Well, yeah, free, or in this case, I'm actually paying $8 a month. That's the nonprofit pricing for Claude, $8 per user per month. A lot of the tools you see that look like AI tools are actually just front ends for one of these three services because they all have AI, they all have APIs. And so a lot of what you see is like an AI tool is somebody putting a front end on in a very specific functionality that ultimately calls through to Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini.
And that's all. Jasper says that. They say they use all of them, all the LLMs. So I know it's just a better front end, but still.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would you worry about if a grant is a good fit or not, and not just have Claude apply to them all?
So, great question. And that is, God, there's so many issues that I could be talking about in the class. So one of the issues I talk about is the fire hose effect of AI is great at generating content, and it's starting to overwhelm, for example, scientific paper reviewers because you can use AI to quickly generate papers, and you could probably use AI to quickly fill out grant applications. However, it still takes human time with each grant application to review what's been written. You don't want to embarrass yourself. So that's one thing. The second thing is it can almost be worse to win a grant that you shouldn't get because of example, it having such onerous reporting response requirements that it crushes your organization, which is a thing, right? So sometimes winning a grant is losing.
They're dealing with that a lot in the open source community right now, where people are just inundating them with pull requests and they can't keep up with it because people are just and it's just garbage code. And
Right.
Things aren't getting better, and they're just swamping the people that maintain the open source stuff. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that I'm a member of the Apache Software Foundation, and that's the issue that's been dominating the mailing list recently.
Just reject them all.
Yeah. Well, so what's happening, like it's interesting, the unintended consequences. What I think you're seeing in some open source projects is that people reject all the pull requests except from people they know, which are typically people in their same company. And so what you're starting to see is more and more pull requests being generated by from a single vendor. And that has its own set of issues.
It's inbred.
Yeah, vendor lock-in essentially, or like having too dominant a play in an open source community.
So far, what areas or roles, what responsibilities have AI helped real nonprofits with through your organization? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it outreach?
Yes. So when I teach the class, I'm one of my key points is focus on the tedious, right? If there's something that's tedious, that is where I would try and figure out if AI was going to be effective first. Um, and so tedious things might be like analyzing feedback responses. Every time I teach a class, I manage to get most people to fill out feedback forms because I do it as part of the class at the very end. And I've got a bunch of free-form text fields in there. And I take those and I run them through Claude or ChatGPT. And I say, extract like, what are the two things that would be most important for me to improve in the class with justifications based on the survey responses, right? And in the past, like when I taught a class which had like 50 people in it, the going through 50 survey responses, especially the free-form text in it, that would be tedious, but AI makes it easy, right? So that's an example. Like writing, a thing that AI can do is it can take somebody who is really bad at something and make them maybe okay, right? It's not going to make them great, but it can make them okay. So for example, for me, writing a donor letter, I suck at that. But I feel like with the help of AI, I created an okay outreach letter. And a key point is I probably wouldn't have written that letter at all if I didn't have AI's help, because sitting there looking at a blank page trying to figure out what to write, like often then you just don't do it. And AI can get you past that sort of activation energy requirement of like actually getting something done, even if it's not great, if it's good enough, that's a win.
And then, like you say, you edit that and use that as a base.
Yeah.
And it's better.
Yeah, you iterate on it, but it gets you over the hump on a lot of things. As an example, end of the year, 2 years ago, or a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm doing my accounting for my consulting company, and my reimbursables account should be zero, right? Every expense that I incurred on a trip, I should have billed, and it was not zero. It was off by a couple $100. And the accountant's like, well, you got to fix that. So I've got, I don't know, 30 invoices, hundreds of trip expenses. That's tedious, right? So what I did is I just gave ChatGPT all the PDFs, the invoices. I explained, there's hourly items in there and there's expenses. Um, the expenses, they all should match up against the expenses in a spreadsheet that I downloaded from QuickBooks. Find the ones that don't match. And it did. And I took those 6 entries and I put them into QuickBooks, and my reimbursable expenses were zero. And that was the thing of beauty, right? That's like the definition of tedious, and having AI help me, unbelievably, like just, I was so happy.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, you were talking in the beginning about confidence levels and how you can personalize your prompts in Claude. And it sounded like you were saying how accurate that you want that your prompt to be, I want all this information that you're going out and getting from me to be 95% accurate or verified.
Mm, I
Why
don't,
would
I don't, I didn't say 95% accurate. I said, tell me how confident you are. That was my prompt.
so it wasn't like it sounded like you said you could set it to 70 or this or that, but it's more
No,
like, okay, just tell me how confident you are. Because
right. And basically include justification, prioritize accuracy. Right.
so yeah, it concerns me that some people are not going to prioritize accuracy.
No, it's a big problem for sure. It is, and that's fueling some of the backlash. I mean, there's all kinds of mistakes you can make. I saw one that was really funny. Front page of a major newspaper in Pakistan story, like 4 column story. And at the end of the fourth column, at the very bottom, it said, if you want me to make this more whatever, just ask me. Like when they copied the output from ChatGPT, they went a little too far, and then, you know, they pasted. So yeah, these things happen.
Are there any tools you think really need to be implemented that are just not accessible yet in Claude or Chat or Gemini?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Top of your head, I'm just curious.
so, as an example, I use OmniFocus, which is a program for the Mac that's like an outliner. It's kind of in the getting things done strategy or approach to work. So I have, I don't know, 13,000 items in there over the years. There's no integration between it and Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. Now they have connectors, and connectors are often based on this MCP, Model Context Protocol, that Anthropic came up with, that then lets the large language model interact with external tools. So if there was an MCP for OmniFocus, that would be amazing. And I think, there's just so many tools out there. They're hitting the big ones first, Gmail and Calendar and Outlook and Canva, etc. But there's thousands that could be done.
Yeah, they just can't integrate properly yet.
Right. But recently, like a couple days ago, Anthropic announced that Claude now can actually iterate with tools, where instead of just it sends a request to the tool and it gets the response back, it actually is sort of using the tool as a thought partner in a way, which has a lot of interesting potential.
Right, it just calls it for a little help.
Right. It's like, there's been integrated tools for a long time. Like even with ChatGPT, it had Dolly at the very beginning to create images, and that essentially was an agentic sort of external tool that used Stable Diffusion to build images versus the Claude large language model. But what's interesting now is that integration is such that like Claude can ask something to make an image and it gets the image back, and then it might ask another service to review the image and give it its feedback, and then it might pass that feedback back to the original tool to like update the image. Like you can actually have these kinds of interactions.
So Ken, as you work with, or look to work with nonprofits, many of whom are pretty naive technically,
Mhm.
and beyond the, I mean, obviously you're focused on confidence levels and not making stupid entries such as copying that last
Right.
minute. What concerns you about the security of the AI world right now, and the guidance that you would give an organization that you're working with on where not to go and what's
Right. Yeah, the biggest issue is it's essentially using what they call the button, where you just have the AI write the text for you, which has so many issues, including like brain rot. Like you're no longer using your high level functions as much as you should. But also when you outsource that to the AI, what you get back is something that isn't really you, right? It isn't your tone of voice. It doesn't take advantage of all the institutional knowledge and context that you've got inside you. That is the biggest single thing that I see, because as humans, we're optimized to reduce energy output, right? Like I will eat potato chips and lie on the couch. And when it comes to AI, it's like, great, I'll have AI do this painful writing task for me. It's like magic. But I emphasize over and over again, the right approach is you use AI as a brainstorming partner. Then you take one of those ideas and you write the rough draft, and then you work with AI to critique it, because that's how you get an authentic voice, and you leverage as much as possible what you know as a person that's specific to your organization and your community and all the other things that go into writing something that's good. Does that make sense? Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Do we have people online as well? So feel free to unmute and ask a question if you're online. Otherwise, I know it's getting a little late for you. And here, I'll actually see.
It's 9:30.
That's not too bad.
What's
No.
the most complex task you've successfully got an AI agent to perform for you?
So I used Claude Code to help me plan out integrating some new functionality into this Pinot open source project. So basically I pointed it at the Flink code base, which is, or no, the Pinot code base, which is a large, Pinot is an analytics database open source project. So I pointed Claude at the code base. I pointed Claude at the open source project that had a really good vector search implementation that I wanted to integrate. And I had it come up with what the issues would be in doing the integration and how would it go about doing the integration, like actually help me work out a plan. And that was a pretty heavy lift.
Did it go smoothly or did it take multiple iterations?
It took multiple iterations, mostly because it was my first time really trying to use it to do that kind of large code base, not refactoring, but I guess it was like basically I'm saying replace this existing implementation with something better from a different, an outside open source project. And so I think with a lot of these things, like the first time you do it, you make mistakes and then you're like, oh, next time I would not do that. I would have a better prompt, or I would organize my data better. I wouldn't give it such a big chunk of data. I'd break the problem down for it a little bit, right? I'd help it.
Any other questions? We're good. Wow, Ken, that was amazing. That was really thoughtful on the first part, of course. Well, second half too, but appreciate the time you took to bring everything out there from your past. Help us do that. And then best of luck, certainly in your endeavors with AI for community, and look forward to seeing you in our community.
I will be there. I think Center for Nonprofit Leadership, basically the community foundation, is going to set up another in-person class in the next couple months locally. So I might impose on Cindy to put a little note out in some of your mailings, letting people know that that's going to happen. So if you or somebody you know is involved with a nonprofit, you can let them know about it, because that's word of mouth is the most effective approach I have right now. So, and also, by the way, it was kind of fun putting together this presentation. I had this idea, like this thought about taking breaks and how useful they had been for me, but I hadn't spent the time to actually think through it and write it down. So I wrote a rough draft, and then I worked with Claude to break it up into slides with appropriate bullet points, and then I created the slides. So yeah, I was using AI, but it was fun. It was actually a fun exercise.
Well, I have one more quick question.
Mhm.
For someone who's quite naive about AI, using large language models, etc., what would be a good way for a person who's just starting to learn more about AI and how it could be used?
I mean, there's a lot of content out there. It kind of annoys me in that so much of the content is like, you're behind, you're doing it wrong. It's everybody's trying to carve out their space. There's a guy on YouTube. I think his YouTube handle is the MIT Monk, all one word. And he has stuff on AI that I enjoyed watching, unlike a lot of the content out there about AI. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yep.
All righty. Once again, Ken, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time, and best of luck to you. And thanks to everybody here as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but appreciate it. All right.